Okay, now I'll call the meeting back to order. In the next item, strategic and workforce plan discussion. So how is this going to take place? Rebecca, fill us in?
Well, I created an outline. I know that Marie has some significant thoughts on the strategic plan discussion, so what I've done is created just, now we don't have to follow this exactly, but these are kind of just thought points that we should have along the way. So I thought we could start our strategic plan discussion. And I also included workforce. We do create a workforce plan for our review with the governor, for our strategic review, or at least we did with Governor Burgum. So we do have some information on our workforce plan. I can have Alicia bring that up if we need it, but I wanted to start by going over our current, what we have as our current strategic plan. Now you'll see it's an attachment. I hope you guys each have it, but the current strategic plan is broke up into 5 strategic initiatives. And what we try to do, I have Paul's words in my head every now and then that we didn't want to put a strategic plan into place and then forget about it. And so, no, it's okay. So when we talk about our strategic initiatives, what we try to do is anything that we do, and this is how we approached our budget discussions and our annual report that we did back in September, we tried to tie it to, or we did tie it to, the strategic initiatives. So if we want to start with reviewing where we are or what we put together for the current biennium or what we've been working on for the last 18 months, and then assess the current environment, if we want to change our strategic priorities, and some of that will have to do based upon the resources that we have available. And then there's some more practical considerations, performance metrics, resources that we need, and budget implications, public engagement and education. These are just kind of ideas. This is by no means we have to follow this outline, step by step. But let's maybe start our strategic discussion with reviewing what our strategic initiatives were, keeping in mind that ultimately the goal of the Ethics Commission is to ensure and promote transparency and accountability, and that ultimately the goal is to try to strengthen the confidence of citizens in their government in North Dakota. So in order to fulfill that mission, last biennium, or in this current biennium, I'm already jumping ahead to 25-27, but we adopted 5 strategic initiatives and then have kind of what I would call aspirational goals or aspirational directives underneath each of those. Our first strategic initiative was education and outreach. And this was really where we started to put together what should education, ethics education and ethics outreach look like in the state. We created our educational initiative, and those were also aspirational as to what we can do. So when we talk about the education initiative, it really built on itself. We started with the number 5, I think, on that, which was updating the FAQs, or doing things that were free and were quick. And then they built up, hopefully, to some sort of ethics summit. But we obviously have limited resources in the education and outreach arena now. Strategic Initiative 2 was relationships and communication. So if we want to talk about, or talking about this strategic initiative, communication was a big problem with the Ethics Commission, and it was because of lack of communication channels. So prior to the 2023-2025 biennium, we did not have ways to send out an email that would go out to all of the stakeholders. So all of the public officials, all of the boards and commissions point of contact. This is still continues to be a struggle because of boards and commissions. But Alicia maintains those lists on a regular basis and has created, we use GovDelivery, which we get for free, right? Because there's so many entities that use it. Hopefully we will continue getting it for free. Alicia and I are a little not sure if that's going to continue. But where we can send an email or communication, it can go to different groups or it can go out to everybody. So just getting those communication channels open. We've also created some more easily accessible ways for people to communicate with commissioners through the website, which Cindy has talked about a little bit. And then the other one with relationships and communications is providing timely advice to assist individuals with ethical situations. So these are the instances where individuals call. Now, Logan and I do need to be careful that we can't give them a yes or no, as we talked about yesterday. But what we try to do is we try to direct them to a rule or to an FAQ or to an advisory opinion that can help them answer. We have kind of a standard response for some things that look at these factors based on this information. So that is what we've established to date on that one. Strategic Initiative 3 is rules review and creation. So I want to focus a little bit on this one as to where we are on this, because as Logan and I started to conduct a thorough review of potential rules for adoption by the commission, that is when Logan and I really said we can go, I'm going to be blunt, we can go and create all the rules, administrative rules that the commission would like us to do, but if we still don't have a complaint process that functions in a timely or streamlined way, we're going to continue to get bogged down. Hence why we then created or started working on House Bill 1360. And so we put the rest of the reviewing what other potential rules for adoption by the commission, we put that on hold to see what would happen with the process of 1360. Because in order to have effective rules, you have to have effective processes. The other one that is really kind of a key here is reviewing what amendments we need to make to the rules that are in place. So there is some gift questions, there's some probably rewording that needs to be done on several of the rules. Now in light of legislation, we may need to change the rules. In light of that, we will, in change of that discussion. So we need to be looking at what rules we need to amend. So that's really I'll be honest, that's a really big job. And I think if we take a holistic approach with the rules creation, that's good. But we first need to address our process problem, that the complaint process is flawed and is certainly far from perfect. The other thing that we didn't do is we did not provide legislative recommendations with increased transparency and accountability because we were focused on the complaint process and improving that complaint process. So we did not do this last step. I think that this step is built into the annual report that was added as part of Senate Bill 2004. Positive work culture. So back in 2023, when we drafted this, we just had brought Alicia and Logan on. And so we wanted to make sure that we created a positive work environment and a work culture so that we promoted creativity. I definitely think we've been successful at promoting creativity, more like we've been pushed to be creative. We want to make sure that employees feel that they can address issues with our staff and that everybody feels valued. So that was just creating that positive work culture right out of the bat when we have new people coming on board. Thankfully, the people who we brought on board made this very easy. And we still have work to do there with, Alicia reminds me every week I need to mark my, when I work out and for our wellness things, and we have some other kind of, internal things that we do need to keep going with. And then the last one was meaningful enforcement. This again was the result or created House Bill 1360, that we need to have consistent application of the rules, and that was going to be promoted by having a more informal resolution that was driven by the commission and that we had standards that we followed. And we ensured that the complaint process was fairly and consistently administered. Again, that all got to House Bill 1360. So as you can see, a lot of our strategic initiatives that we've had done for 23-25 really resulted in, hey, let's try and be collaborative with the legislature and bring House Bill 1360, because it would have fixed, or it would have met the mission of many of our strategic initiatives. So I think with that, that's kind of the overview that I wanted to provide to the commission on our strategic plan. On our workforce plan, as far as workforce is concerned, we did have the additional FTE included in our workforce. I do have concerns about our workforce. How we have been proceeding to date is with a lot of extra hours. Thankfully, Alicia is paid for her extra hours through overtime, which is very nice that we have the ability to do that. But our workforce, I am concerned that our workforce is going to reach burnout with the amount of work that we are doing. So we are in a catch-22 because there is less work that gets done when we aren't working 50 or 55 hours a week. But also that's not sustainable in the long run. So I can talk more about that or give the commission more information. But that is kind of where I wanted to start our strategic review. I think if we could walk through these and maybe reaffirm things that we can, yes, we want to stay focusing on this. We want to develop this more. I think once we have that, we can then get into maybe some other factors that would affect our strategic plan for the 25, 27. And, you know, we have to think beyond that. The 10-year goals, the 3-year goals for the commission.
So we're going to talk about, I think the first thing we should talk about is how do we prevent the burnout, what you need from us to make sure that doesn't happen. What you need from me so that session is over, doesn't mean everything stops. We understand that. Mm-hmm. But what can we do to support your efforts to prevent burnout and give your staff time?
So I think the one thing was yesterday when we had the discussion of kind of knocking education, I don't want to say knocking it down on the priority list,
right,
but by giving us priorities of what we need to focus our work on. We each have or should have 40 hours a week to do our work, and that way we can be very intentional with what we do, and instead of feeling that we are being pulled in
right,
3 different directions. So I think that's part of it. If we get priorities from you guys, from the commission, about what we need to do, I think that would be helpful to the workforce.
I think one of the priorities is to rearrange the numbering so that the strategic initiative 5, it's called enforcement, but it's campaign or complaint resolution process. We move to the top, and because if it's not, the commission will be beat up again in the 2027 session of the number of outstanding complaints. And that even though education and outreach is very important, it should probably be done when there's time to do it, provided the first objective is being handled in a timely manner. Does that make sense?
Because right now we break it up as to about, we take about 33% of our time to education and break it up based on what the percentages that are outlined in job descriptions, et cetera, based on legislative intent from the 2023 session. So I think if we reprioritize our time.
And so when you implement that rule about case management and get a system, you may discover that there is some time available to do education, but that would be when time permits, not adding 10 hours to a 40-hour work week. It's to handle, get the rules out, to do the complaint management, and then if there's time left to do the education, that's my thinking about it.
Well, carry it further, we would switch 5 and the current number 1 around.
To be clear, I don't know if we put these in order of priority last time. I don't know if we did that. I don't think it was.
Well,
But I like the idea of.
What I remember was our discussion was, yeah, we numbered them, but it's not a ranking or a priority,
Right.
no,
Okay.
whatever. But I agree. And I think also just, let's forget the numbers. And I'd like to hear from Rebecca and staff directly about reprioritizing these priorities. I've already, in my head, I've kind of renumbered them myself. But I'm not sure because I think I know and understand how you do these. But then I'm just coming off a legislative session, but also in prep for 27. I think this one's got to be 1, rules review creation, meaningful enforcement's got to be number 2, and then relationships is 3. Those 3 things I think are interconnected and whatever. Education and outreach, we've already discussed. We want this, we like it, but right now it's taking a back seat to everything else in that. The other aspect or comment I'll make is the positive work culture, and you're tying stuff into your job descriptions and that. Isn't that more administration?
Not a
Management?
strategic goal, but
Yeah, I'm like, I don't think that should be in here. But-
more.
I can see that, Cindy. And I think we included it back in 2023 because it was new. But I think now it's more of just that falls on me as it's included in my job description and I need to do that. But I think Paul was very concerned that when we were bringing people in and we were growing our staff, that we wanted to make sure that we were not walking into an environment that was negative or, difficult. How do I want to say that?
And back then, Paul was probably thinking that we would be supported for additional staff. Which of course,
Potentially,
happen.
yep.
but potentially back then.
Yeah.
Was more optimistic.
At the same time, though, if we take it out of here,
Mhm.
which I think we should do, we also have a responsibility to be assured that our exec director and staff know this is what we want, this is what we're promoting. And so then, but that to me, that's internal, that's administrative.
Yep.
Yeah, then you guys come back and tell us, oh, this is not working, we've got to do this or that. Either we need more equipment, or we're gonna do it this way with personnel or whatever, and that, yeah.
So Cindy, one way to do that, this is very straightforward, and maybe this is too straightforward, but is to add this into my job description. That I need to ensure this.
There you go. Yeah.
Is that too straightforward?
That's your job.
It's my job.
Yeah.
So
And
it should be, and
it
it's not included in my job
I
description
thought there
currently.
was.
Not the way that it's worded here. There is, so the job description that I follow, we probably need to look at and
Okay.
reevaluate because it was put in place when I was hired. And at the time I was hired, there was no staff. And so I was not managing people. I guess Holly is a temp. But that job description has not been updated since. So that's one of the things that Jill and I have talked about. We've updated both Logan's job description and Alicia's job description, but the executive director's has not been updated. So we can do that.
like to hear from you guys, so about those three, the relationships, communications, rules, review, and creation, enforcement. If we're going to put them 1, 2, 3, do we even have to number them?
I prefer not to number them.
Because, I mean, they're so interconnected.
Yeah.
They're separate things, but
If we put meaningful enforcement first, I think that kind of messes things up because I don't think we should be enforcing things, quote unquote, until we've done some of the other things like positive work culture. That should, if we're going to rank, that should be, as far as I'm concerned, that should be the first thing. Or relationships should be the first. Those two are most important as far as I'm concerned. Enforcement, I don't think we have to worry about until we get the other, like the positive work culture and the relationships established.
so Ron, we just discussed that positive culture. We're taking it out of here, and it's going to be going into the executive director's job description.
Right.
It's more of this administrative thing. So we're left with 4, I guess, priorities or initiatives for the work of the Ethics Commission. And maybe relationships and communication should be the starting point. Then the rules review and creation, then enforcement.
Yeah.
I think you could take the strategic initiative number piece off and just list them in a logical flow.
Yes,
That makes
there you go. Yeah.
The other thing to consider is, do we still want to have, and this was part of the outline, is evaluating whether our strategic initiatives are still the same, or whether they should be revised to add something or subtract something, as Cindy just said. Or maybe change slightly based on the progress that, we've made a lot of progress on relationships and communication based on what we've put into place with how we can communicate with people. I think that we still have work to do on that, but it's more toward boards and commissions, where with public officials and lobbyists, we've gotten pretty good. We do run into problems with lobbyists because they aren't required to provide an email address. That creates a lot of work for Alicia to maintain and go and find email addresses, and they're not verified. So, we're going and finding, I'll pick on John Ward. Okay. So we know that he works at a law firm, so we're able to go and find that particular email address, but he's not required to put his email address on the lobbyist form.
The Secretary of State could require that, right?
They maybe could, yep.
And
That's a discussion that we can have.
That might be a solution to the problem, just say, please, would you do this?
That should be as simply as making it a required field when they re-register, instead of having it be non-required.
Is there a reason they don't
It
require it?
might be, the statute might say what's required when they register, and that might be why it's not on the form. But it might be something where they create the forms, then they can change it. So I'll look into it.
I think there was like over 300 or so that didn't have emails. It took me a lot of time to go try to search for that many. And it was, an easy task, but not a fun task.
And it's time consuming. It's very time consuming. And we also
And I
are
still
not
probably only found
verified.
half of them.
Yep.
And half of them still weren't.
So how many do you think we're missing?
I'd have to look. I guess 200 or so.
So then the question then becomes, if we were to receive a complaint against one of those lobbyists, how do we communicate with them efficiently?
Find them, yeah.
So how do we find them? Especially if they're out of state, but they're a lobbyist registered in North Dakota. So it creates, even a simple thing of not having an email address creates a logistical hurdles that start small and get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And now if they claim they didn't receive notice of a complaint, now we're in a whole other issue because of something very small like that.
It's the Secretary of State who they register with.
Yes.
So it could even in your conversation with the Secretary of State, see if they would be willing to change their form and add that line in there.
Yep, we will do that. But I think that's a good demonstration of how when we sometimes start what appears to be a small task, a small logistical task, right? Of, hey, let's get all of the public official emails or the elected officials or the boards and commissions. It can turn into a rabbit hole of logistics.
Yeah, I can see that.
But the public officials, people who are elected, we do have their email addresses for the most part. That's not a problem, right? Where we run into issues is with boards and commissions.
I think the governor's office did a good job updating them all because I this year went and found them all again and we added a lot that we didn't have. So there is a
Good.
primary contact for pretty much every board and commission, but we still don't have all the people on the boards, but there's a primary contact at least for them, at least one, sometimes two.
Okay.
Yeah, there was 287 lobbyists missing emails and I found 123 of them.
So we still have
264 missing.
164.
For boards and commissions, are we just doing the primary contacts? Okay. We're not.
Listed, so, like for ours, Rebecca is listed.
Yeah.
She was gonna filter it out.
Sorry, we kind of went down a rabbit hole on communications, but getting information out to people about resources and things that are happening is seems like a very simple, straightforward thing to do, but it took a lot of time to create the baseline for that. Yep.
And on the boards and commissions, are you communicating with the chair or the secretary?
It's whoever they have appointed to the governor's office as the primary contact, so I don't know.
Which
It's-
may
It
change.
could be different, yeah, but it's consistently changing.
And the governor's office now has, in the last few years, they now have somebody specifically for boards and commissions. And that stayed consistent from Governor Burgum to Governor Armstrong.
The question that I have with the strategic plan is that it's primarily aspirational and there are no metrics associated with it because take, for example, the strategic relationships and communication, establish, create, provide. I like that, but to whom and when, and I think though, and I'll use the military, these are strategic objectives, but we need tactical objectives. How do you plan to implement that at a more granular level that's measurable? That's difficult.
It is difficult. But we need to do it because we need to have measurables where we can. So I think that was part of the issue when we came into legislative session was, yes, we could say we did X, Y, or Z, but we didn't have measurables attached to them.
And then what you could do is that if you have strategic initiatives and measurable goals, what are the obstacles to accomplishing that? And what can be done in between the session and what really needs to be done in the session so that we can achieve these goals? And in effect, planning for the 2027 session today. Because I talked to legislators about things about one legislator in specific guy said, I was trying to promote the education part. And she said, legislators know what's right and wrong. They don't need an education. And I just thought that's not where this disagree with. But if we have measurable things that say, I'm going off in the wrong direction here, but I just think there should be as kind of some bullets. These are our measurable goals to implement.
I couldn't agree more, Murray.
But that's more difficult.
It is more difficult, particularly with the resources that we have available. So that's where it is a struggle. But I also think, particularly in the realm of complaint resolution, having those measurables, setting those standards that we, our goal can be to get 75% of complaints resolved within a year. I'm not saying that that's going to be the goal, but
Some of those things are beyond your control because you may have 50 come in that you don't have any jurisdiction, and 5 come in that are incredibly complicated.
and take a very long time. Well, there's a lot of, I think that's one of the things that we forget about is there's a lot of things that are outside of our control when it comes to how we do, or what we do on a daily basis. That there might be a question that comes in or an issue, and then it pulls our attention. But
I think when you also talk about measurables, part of it, I kind of see it as a strategic plan with this annual report now that we will be doing too. How'd you meet the strategic plan and outlining those? How you did or how you didn't. That's kind of how, in my mind, I've been conceptualizing that new requirement that it'll go hand in hand with this, where this is the goals, but then you outline the metrics on the back end, but also how you can better align to come back and meet the strategic plan. Rather than putting it all in the strategic plan, if that makes sense. Metrics.
yeah. Is there anything that we should, I agree with that. So I think if we were to look at we're down to 4 now, right? So if we take those, is there anything that we want to add or change about the ones that we have? I think we can rename 5 instead of meaningful enforcement to, I don't even want to say complaint resolution, but case resolution. We'll come up with a better word. But I think if we focus just on case resolution or resolution of ethical issues, there I think there are definite measurables that we could put on timelines. For instance, develop a case time standards and have that done by a particular date. Would you consider that a measurable then?
Just cross-reference the time standards.
Yes.
Make it easier.
Right. But then our measurable could say we're going to have this done by September of 2025.
There is a deadline.
And there is an actual deadline on that one. That's why I picked that one, because we have 9 months to do that, right? So then we have that one. Then the other one for a complaint resolution is get our, one of the things that we've talked about is getting better data on how long each stage is taking. And so have that done by X date. I don't want to put a date on it, but
If you do that, then you can better identify what are the obstacles to shortening that time.
yes.
And can you capture those moments and times and those obstacles somehow. So for me, then that becomes the justification for 27. We're going to get that FT. We're going to get 3.
Or a rule.
Or a rule.
Yeah.
So can I just back up for just a minute? Because in section 3, or article whatever, in section 3 of the Article 14, it says, in order to strengthen the confidence of the people of North Dakota in their government, to support open, ethical, and accountable government, in a way, should the strategic plan go back to the Constitution? What was the objective of the Constitution? And what are the strategic objectives of the Ethics Committee to implement what that article wanted? And open and accountable government. Open, for example, is transparent. To my mind, is transparency. What is a strategic objective or plan of the Ethics Committee to improve transparency? And I don't, am I making any sense?
Yes.
Yeah, and we have it. It's, because you put it on the sample thing. So we always articulate that first. And usually we articulate that even before we say our mission statement. But maybe somehow that needs to be better highlighted. So here are these things as to how we are doing, supporting an open, ethical, accountable state government.
And so, for example, does the Ethics Commission have any role in campaigns for elective office? Or is that just a legislative role? Do you see where I'm coming from? Because it's my perception that the Ethics Commission has not been really focused on that issue.
On the open?
On the back up a little bit. In a democracy, in order to vote for candidates, there has to be factual information out there, information about the candidates, so that people can make an informed choice.
Yep.
And then there's what I'll just call dark money coming in and influencing that. To what extent should the Ethics Commission be involved in that role of government, of democracy, making sure that it's open and transparent, so that people have the right information upon which to select the representatives? And so that's at a higher level. Should that be a strategic objective of the Ethics Commission? And if it is, going off in kind of a different direction.
Yeah, and
Because so far it seems that the focus has been, we're waiting for a complaint to come in, and how do you process that complaint? But should the focus of the Ethics Commission be at a slightly higher level to say, we want to be, as a commission, we want to be interested in ensuring that people have the right information so that they can make an informed decision about candidates for elective office. Now, you've been in elective office, Ron, and so you may have more insights. I'm just a voter.
I like the, excuse me, I like the idea. The concept is, though, it kind of falls in this education and outreach category, which we aren't prioritizing. So I don't know if we can add that in at this particular point.
So I went back and I checked all of the ethics-related bills, and like I said, there are 16 ethics-related bills. And many of them were on campaign-related issues.
Yeah.
And some came from here, some came from there, some came from there. And there didn't seem to be any kind of
Cohesion?
cohesion to that or any kind of collaboration to develop legislation to make sure that our elections are open and transparent.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And is that a role of the Ethics Commission, or do we react after the legislature passes legislation in a complaints committee?
So Marie, I think that that's a very valid question. And when we looked at our strategic initiative on rules review and creation,
Yeah.
that was one of the areas that we talked about. So we have been given 4 buckets: transparency, corruption, elections, and lobbying. And as we talk about the role of the Ethics Commission, does that fall within one of those buckets that we could potentially draft rules on? And so when we talk about campaign finance, campaign disclosures, the ethical issues surrounding campaigns, not the administration of elections. That's right. We're not going to get into that. But that is what we had kind of discussed when we initiated or had the strategic initiative of rules review and creation, of whether that is something that we should be looking at. So I think we're getting to the same spot, but maybe by different means, right? Because you're looking at it as from the Constitution, and we looked at it that way. But I think it's a valid question.
But
Yeah.
we also, Ward's point, when we've had these conversations all along, to what you're getting at, that was genesis, from my perspective, of education and outreach. Trying to create those relationships let's have these conversations at this different level to get to. But we stumbled, but it wasn't our fault in stumbling. It's just the way things got situated or got put in place in that. So now, from my perspective, it's coming back to us through complaints. And so for me, that's what opens the door. Again, even though we've talked here, we see it differently now. So how? But based on the session that just ended, I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't think they're very receptive. So for me, that's part of why I'm going to push us for enforcement. You don't want to talk this way up here before, fine, we'll talk after the fact. And so how? So again, and I understand why we have to do what we're doing, but the education was to me going to be that doorway to doing those kinds of things and talking about it at that level. But some of the doors are kind of bolted. I mean, not even open a crack.
I was just a little bit surprised by the focus of this legislative session to campaigns and AI and false advertising and false statements and that. And some of it passed, but a lot of it was killed. And in a 70 days legislative session, they say in 70 days they tried to come up with something and didn't. And is there a role for the Ethics Commission at a higher level to say?
I'd like us to attempt to do that. And I'm meaning us, the commissioners, with the staff's knowledge in that. Because Murray specifically, you've brought up here several times now in our conversation for the last day and a half about how you have gone back and looked at these things. And so now my curiosity is really, there were 18 different bills out there? I only knew about 1 or 2. And so as a commissioner, I want to look at those 18 bills. I want to have I want to look at why, how come they did that? have that analysis in my own head. So then as a member of the North Dakota Ethics Commission, okay, how do we broach that with these people, these legislators who are coming from all sectors? Is there a way we could sit at the table together and say, hey, how come you brought this up and how can we work together? Because maybe it sits over there with, as a statute or whatever that does campaign, that maybe it's over there, but maybe we can make a contribution.
Because the bill that held up the legislature till 4 o'clock in the morning was a campaign bill, 1377. And there's a lot of heat and sometimes some light on that bill, but I'm just, at what level should the ethics commission be? And like I say, I'm a new person here, and what I saw the focus on this session was how to improve the complaint resolution process with the House Bill 1360. And we focused on that and focused on 2004 to get a person in to educate. But meanwhile, over here, there's this big.
And we stayed out of that very intentionally. Yes.
But there's this big ethics-related issue on transparency and campaigning and all of that that's going on kind of separately from what we're doing. Should the Ethics Commission be involved in that country? Try to resolve that issue to make elections more transparent in a democracy.
Well, we've been in existence about 5.5 years.
Yeah.
And that has never been an emphasis. Elections have never been an emphasis at all.
Should they be?
I think they should be. Dave, what do you think? You know, can you remember that we have ever emphasized anything with elections or city? I don't think we have. And it seems to me we should, I've thought about it.
So there was one instance, not one instance, but last May and June, we had quite a bit of what I would say campaign or election related complaints that came in. And they were, do you remember that? And so that was a precipitating factor we received direction from the commission after the June meeting to go and do research and see kind of get a baseline. Well, when we started doing that research, we went, yep, this is all great. This is something that we could talk about. But that's when we came back to the process for the complaint process is really flawed. And in order to, before we reach these substantive issues, but if we're creating a process that's outside the complaint process, or if we were to have those different discussions, that changes kind of the approach that we take. So I think that's been the only time that it's come up. Yeah. And then it ended up leading to, well, if we're going to be doing this, we should probably fix the complaint process first. Hence, we set to work and we focused on 1360. But.
And you're right, Ron. This is a new commission focused on moving along. But is it time for the commission to address the ethics of campaigning for public office so that there are fair and ethical campaigns so that the people can make decisions? I'm just throwing this out on the table because I was surprised by there were 16 bills, and a majority of them had to do with campaign legislators frustrated because people were lying about them, making false statements about them, and they didn't know how to deal with it. They were angry. And so they introduced a bill here. Most of them got killed.
Well, we had the one case also about the weaponization of our process, which I think irked all of us.
And them. And
Exactly, and because we're still building the steps, the processes, it's just like, because that was another aspect of wanting to do something more publicly. Pay attention to this, people, as you get ready to vote. This person did this or did that. I mean, and I hate to couch it that way, because again, I don't want to be the one out to get you or to tell on you in that, but expectation of, if you're running for an elected position, as a citizen, my expectations are some kind of baseline ethical practices and values. You know, and to me, that's the other key aspect of this body. Of us.
in the election process, the Secretary of State basically is involved in making sure that ballots are cast properly, counted properly, and so the election process is done properly. But nobody is really seems to be involved in the ethics or the truth telling or all of that in the campaign process up to the time that there's actually a vote.
The judiciary is to some extent, you know.
If there's a criminal complaint
No, if there's ethical complaints too,
against the judge.
against an opponent. You know, so you and I are running for a judge position, and I complain because Murray is a shady guy because of the way he's got his yard signs. There is a complaint process that the judiciary is involved with. There's a, what's it called? See, I was on the Judicial Ethics Advisory Committee, but there's also an enforcement arm to that too. But we don't deal with it, you know, so.
So
but
there-
they are. Go ahead.
I was going to say, there is a criminal component to these, right? So a lot of the campaign finance things have a criminal component. What the struggle is that information, and Logan and I I've talked to 2 state's attorneys about this particular issue, is that charging those out, you know, kind of on the bottom of their priority list. But it is really fundamental to democracy. But when they have a, you know, priority list of drugs, sex trafficking, murders, those sorts of things, this gets pushed to the bottom. So what can happen at times is that somebody who has a sign that maybe isn't properly disclosed, doesn't have the right information on it, they will go to a sheriff or they will go to their state's attorney, and nothing is ever done about it. And so I think that leads to or led to a lot of the frustration that happened. I remember the June primary specifically. There was a lot of frustration with that. So there is this criminal component to it, but the criminal component to it is, you know, it has to be pretty egregious, or there's got to be multiple times or something for the state's attorneys to look at it. And I don't blame the state's attorneys at all,
Well, I
because
think
of their.
Both of them that you talked to expressed frustration that
Yes.
they had to deal with these issues on top of their already high caseload.
Yes, they did. Both of them did.
But if you go back to the first sections of the ethics article, the people of North Dakota need information to choose candidates, vote on ballot measures, and ensure that they're accountable. And I mean, it seems to me that was the primary reason.
It was the primary reason.
That in a democracy, you have to have hold people accountable for making false statements and trying to improperly influence the process. And the legislature is struggling with that. And something new is coming up all the time. AI issues but when I went through these bills this last week, I thought, I hadn't even thought about that. And that ended up to be one of the most controversial bills in the legislature in the session. And then I heard many times, well, an ethics complaint is weaponizing against me. Filing a complaint and then they're talking about, I can't say anything.
Well, you hear in the media a lot of times, well, call-in shows. Why isn't the Ethics Commission doing something about this? And I'm sure some of that has been with campaign shenanigans, so.
So is this something that the Ethics Commission should be considering in addition to everything else it's doing with the resources that we have? I'm just saying that.
So I think there's some logistical hurdles that we have to that. But something that if we look for a process outside of the traditional complaint process, or let me rephrase, under the statutorily established complaint process to evaluate or to address those issues, that may be a good avenue.
Well, certain legislatures were trying to fix a problem, and they couldn't agree
Right.
on how to fix it. Is this something a void that the Ethics Commission should perhaps step into? I just bring it up because I was really surprised that that was a huge issue that the commission seemed to not focus on because we had two bills, 1360 on process and 204 on funding. And everything else was kind of outside the scope of our vision.
Yep.
Right.
So we monitored all of those bills, right? We definitely did. We kept an eye on them. We've also had dark money in the back of our head, that there have been multiple bills introduced, and I think that's what you're including in that is dark money. I don't like the term dark money, but campaign contributions, let's call it, or PACs. So those are things, if you look at what other ethics commissions do, they do address those.
And that also gets down to the true source of funds.
Yes,
issue.
in section 2.
And I would bet Kobo has a lot of seminars on that.
Yes.
Well, the one meeting I went to for Kogo, that sessions I went to, it was mostly all on dark money. And it was great for me as a commissioner, a new commission.
Oh, what?
But it was also frightening when you get into the weeds, into the details about how that stuff really works. It's like,
I don't think there's an interim study on this issue.
No, but the commission could do one.
Would be local, but not local, for the state, or do a study on, and it'd be beyond it.
It'd be interesting to have, it would be interesting to have a dialogue with legislators who were involved in support or in opposition to those bills. Say, what's the role of the legislature and what's the role of the Ethics Commission in this?
Mhm.
Yeah. As if we don't have anything else on the agenda. But we're talking about strategic plan.
But it's a strategic, yes.
Is that an issue that should be considered in the strategic plan?
The issue of dark money,
No, the issue of campaign
campaign
integrity.
finance.
Campaign integrity, which might include a number of things. Because the commission has jurisdiction over legislature, public officials, and that, but does it have jurisdiction over candidates?
Yeah, I would say it does.
Statewide legislators.
Can we also go down a whole nother path? This, and it's education and outreach, but I guess voicing our opinions as a body about what we believe in when we're talking about ethics. So we have something more, I guess, opinionated on our website. Just some basic things. Our expectations of an elected official or a legislative body, and here's this group over here, here's this board or commission. And everybody, or most entities or organizations, have accountability, transparency, even conflict of interest things. They have pieces getting it to that more, I guess, philosophical concept. And we are the North Dakota Ethics Commission. And just saying, what is that? And delving into it more. I mentioned to most of you, I think, I don't know, formally in a meeting about my frustration watching our staff at the hearings and getting called out about the number of complaints and how much that just, because you see the numbers, well, yeah. So then they don't give us the resources to deal with that. But looking at those, and it's like most of that was about how people talk and voice their opinion in that, and then using that in a derogatory manner, and that which I find really frustrating. I expect more. So is that just me personally? I don't think so, and I believe that's why we were created. The expectation of elected officials, public officials, or people who get into these roles, and that a baseline or a common ground. So can we get to just having good staff who are really smart, that can help us write and articulate this stuff? Here's what we feel as the North Dakota Ethics Commission, or believe in when we're talking about ethics and differentiating between ethics, moral behavior, common sense, legal. Because to me, the other aspect of all of this work, we talk about this process, complaints, rules, guidelines, okay, criminality, but we're the Ethics Commission, which is this other, to me, more subjective in that, and I guess I want us to do more. I want to jump into the fire, or light the fire, but I think it's already lit. And somehow, let's take the stand and let's just do things.
Would it be appropriate for the Ethics Commission to adopt rules saying that if you're a candidate for elective office at the state level, here is what is expected of you as a candidate? And
Took the words right out of my mouth, right?
And I'm just thinking that the legislature said, here's one role for you to expect to handle complaints. But that doesn't mean that that's the only role for the Ethics Commission. And the Ethics Commission can say, this is what we expect candidates. And if there's a violation of that, we will investigate them. There may never be a complaint to a state's attorney, but it may, just by doing that, it may signal to candidates, look, you better not do that. I'm just thinking out loud here. We're talking about strategic planning. careening toward the noon hour.
We are.
Careening towards a break.
But, I mean, maybe it's something that could be more thought out after, at the next meeting, after we have digested what the bills were, 16 bills.
Have you said any writing on our analysis of the 16?
So it was 1377 just went. It was like 4 a.m. on Friday or Saturday
Saturday
morning.
morning.
And so I just shut down after that. And I didn't have enough time between then and I started, went back and reviewed in summary form the 16 bills.
Did you get the impression on, in looking at these, that there was a theme or a line from one to another?
The theme that I got from my summary review are the number of legislators who are upset by things that were done to their camp, said to them.
Yep.
Are done to them. And that they were really didn't know how to deal with it. So they introduced a bill.
So I think I would phrase it as they were frustrated that the campaigning process in North Dakota has changed. It's not what it, I'm going to use quotes, what it used to be.
Considered not fair.
And considered not fair.
I think one more, that there's more money involved in these campaigns now as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm willing to, I'm looking at it, so I'm willing to come back at the next meeting and try to have some analysis of it. And meanwhile, I'm planning to talk to a couple of people who are more involved in the process so that I can understand as a commissioner.
Yep.
So,
And that's where we're starting tomorrow with the Secretary of State.
and you're talking about the election process, right?
Nope, we're talking about 1377. What happened? What was the, what was the discussions? What ultimately was the thing that held it up? I think I presented them with 3 questions that I had.
What I plan to do really is go back and listen to some of the Florida people. Just kind of understand. But I want to do this from my perspective so that I better understand. And that's why I brought threw a grenade in the discussion.
But your perspective and how that should affect our strategic goals.
Yeah.
Murray, can I ask you a question? When you talked about those 16 bills, did you include the bills that related to, specifically, I can't remember the name off the top of my head. We testified neutral on it, but it was the bill related to the use of state dollars to lobby on behalf of, and they weren't using the word lobby, but I'm going to use the word lobby, campaign on a ballot initiated measure. Was that included in your, because that was one that, 1411, yes. Yep. 1441.
Was it 14?
It was
14 something. I can't remember.
Or was it 1141?
That's what it
No, I
1141.
Because that related to, there was a lot of questions that came out of that particular bill on lobbying issues and the ability of organizations, professional organizations to be using state money to campaign for or against an initiated measure. But in the the committee hearing, it turned into a lot of questions about when can somebody lobby, when can't somebody lobby, and a lot of kind of big questions. And then we also got those on 2052, which was the bill related to our revolving door prohibition on lobbyists, that you needed to wait 2 years to lobby. So
What's so
there,
controversial about that one?
Nothing.
nothing.
I think it was frustration with the underlying restriction on lobbying. And
Yes,
there's
and
this, there's this Eighth Circuit case analyzing Missouri's restriction, and it was, the way it was spoken about, they really simplified it and said, well, it's the same as North Dakota's. Well, no, that's not the case. And this Missouri case, the last I checked, was still ongoing, but the discussions weren't at that higher level. It was just, we're frustrated on it in the Constitution to begin with.
1141.
1141, the bill relating to public services or property for a political purpose.
Yep.
And that was failed 39 to 51. 39 in favor. And the key language in that bill, an individual or private organization may not use public funds collected from a political subdivision or an agency or department to state directly or indirectly endorse or oppose a candidate for elective office or a ballot measure. And I thought, why do you need a bill on it? It should be pretty clear. But the Ethics Commission may investigate an alleged violation and may assess a civil penalty of up to $500 against an individual or private organization for violation of this section. So that's not the Ethics Commission.
There was originally reference that we were to review it and criminally refer it to the Attorney General's office and require the Attorney General's office to prosecute. And we at least helped them amend it to get to a cleaner version, which is the one that Murray just read. But that really brought up a lot of issues with lobbying and when state money could be used. So the use of public resources to essentially campaign, which in then turn relates to the issue that you addressed.
So obvious.
Yeah, should a lobbyist be doing that?
But that also goes back to organizations that are using tax funds to join an organization that hires a lobbyist, and it gets back to that issue.
Yep.
And there are many nonprofit organizations that are using tax funds for dues to lobby. So that's one of the 16 bills.
Okay, it was included in here. Yep.
So I have an interest in that. I'll do some more research that I don't tasking anybody else to do. I'll email it out there if they do not respond.
Yes.
Murray, I do have some research that I'll give to you that we did earlier.
Yeah, we started research on that.
And you were involved in the discussions on 1141. I'm just, when I have some time, I'm going back to listening to some of the debates.
I would appreciate that analysis, that just however, I don't expect you to go deep, but I know you will. Just because to me, that's going to help better inform what we're trying to do in updating our strategic plan. But also, for me, that's the new strategic plan, which is going to take us on 2, 4, 5 years, but will set us up for the 27th legislative session to be better prepared. And we have to do it via the existing processes and things we have in place. So,
Or we could create new processes potentially.
I'd help you on that after May.
Certainly.
Yeah. So if you give me a call, but I've got,
How about if I send whatever drafts I have to you and you can do what judges do.
okay, just circle.
do you have enough, based on this discussion, to kind of update and revamp a new strategic plan?
So I'm seeing the focus on rules review. And it maybe isn't even, as we were having the discussion, I'm not sure if it's even rules review, but it's maybe issue review of what issues there are. And
The role of the
the
commission.
role of the commission in addressing those issues.
The issues, the constitutional issues.
Yes. Yeah. So,
At the
you know,
same time, updating the rules to reflect changes in the legislation.
yeah, that'll get done. But I think as far as the strategic initiative goes, you know, there are quite a few issues that the commission hasn't talked about. You know, campaign is one of them, right? But we also have corruption. Campaigns would probably fall under that election bucket, lobbying, and then transparency. And transparency is kind of an open word, literally. It could cover a number of things. But, you know, specifically lobbying, campaigning, and corruption are not ones that have been well-defined or discussed at length. So I think this comes back to an issue review and the role of the commission in addressing those issues.
Is what the legislature did, and this is my perception, what the legislature did in 2019 is it said, okay, they passed the Constitution. The legislature will determine the what not to do. Ethics Commission, you're given this specific process for handling complaints. Stay in your lane. That's my perception.
From the legislature?
Yes. Yeah. Here's the 5466 process for processing complaints, and kind of stay in your lane.
But is that the
Yeah,
That,
the word complaint's not in the Constitution, so they really were reading a process that wasn't in to create it.
yes.
Yeah.
And what I'm suggesting, Dave as chair, that wasn't on your list when I brought it up.
Not yet. Everything's possible when you're doing a strategic review.
It is.
Yeah.
So
Nothing's off limits.
I do want to bring up one, this is maybe a smaller picture, not a big 10,000 foot thing, but when it comes to complaint resolution or streamlining what I called it resolution pathways. So getting very practical about how the commission can, and this is something that Logan and Alicia and I plan on doing, is figuring out what ways, and I think Ward, you kind of talked about this yesterday, right? What ways can we streamline that statutory complaint process to get to a meaningful or a purposeful or an education-based resolution without having it go for an extended period of time. And there's a few different components to that. There is what can we do in our current process? What may we need to change or adopt? What role does subpoenas play in that? And so that has stayed in the back of my head during this entire discussion of campaign stuff. And I have specifically that maybe comes into our complaint resolution strategic initiative. So what measurables or what can we do to decrease the amount of time that it takes us to get through complaints? Now, I will say there's a very large caveat on that our resources are only limited to 3 people on a daily basis. So we are always going to be limited by that factor, unless we can use SAGs to the extent that we have funds available, and investigators, yes. So we can use those professional fees to do that. But that's just very practical thing that we need to consider, that the commission should consider.
So are we going to turn those into strategic goals?
So I think that we have the strategic goal that we've kind of rewritten as, instead of meaningful enforcement, is complaint resolution or ethical issue resolution, and that we had that as number 5. So I think taking that, creating streamlining resolution pathways falls within that on a very kind of micro level, but then creating measurables from there. So
Meaningful enforcement includes the whole process. Complaints. That covers a lot of things.
Yeah.
mhm.
And then you just mentioned the metrics.
Yep.
So,
And I don't have anything right now, like
Yeah.
this is, we're going to do it this date, but we have to create some sort of metric so that we have as a,
But
at
I
least a
noticed,
goal.
move that one to the top. Meaningful enforcement.
I think somebody had it as 1 or somebody has it as 2. But again, we don't have to have them in priority,
No, we don't have to
but
have
I
an
think
order.
that this helps Logan and I know where, specifically Logan and I know where we need to focus our attorney time and our attorney.
I like the bigger words you use, though, for that, the issues review, and this
Yes,
other resolution pathway. Because all these things that kind of fit.
they work together, Cindy. It's not,
Yeah.
you can't look at them in
Exactly,
isolation.
exactly.
Nobody.
That ties into the 2004, the complaint management time standards.
Yes, yep.
Okay, let's take a break here. It is lunchtime after all. So, break. So, for interest of you travelers, come back at 12:30? Is that enough time for
I
lunch?
need to leave at 12:30.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry about that, but I committed to my wife to get her to come along with me,
Okay,
that I would get her home at a certain time, so.
that's all right.
The only thing I need to do is get my computer set report. But go ahead, read. Come back at 12.
Oh, we'll still, I think, take a break. We'll reconvene at 12:30 because we still have a quorum, so
Yeah, you're fine.
that'll work. So that okay with everyone else?
Are we going to keep going on the strategic review,
Yes,
Dave?
yes.
Okay.
We'll try to,
We say 12:15.
we can. Make it quicker and get more work done.
And we come back here.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, we could do that.
Working lunch?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're in recess,
Till what time?
12:15,
Okay.
and still a working lunch.
Ethics Commission meeting is called back to order. So, the most productive part of our, again? No, oh. And just for the public's understanding, we're missing 2 commissioners. We still have a quorum. So the 2 commissioners missing is Ron Goodman and Ward Kozer. Commissioners remaining, Cynthia Lindquist, Murray Sykesby, and so, did we leave enough? So Murray's our plan to kind of just rearrange these, leave that with like a little bit in Alicia, it out. Are we going to add something new? And I don't have anything I want to add.
So maybe, Dave, if I can just give an update of where we are and what
Okay.
the changes that we'll make right now. So I think the idea is to change strategic initiative 5 to more broad, to be resolution pathways for complaints or ethical issues. And then within that, create measurables regarding case management system, time standards, potential timelines of complaints. And then I have getting rid of strategic initiative 4, the positive work culture. We'll move that into the executive director job description, as it is their responsibility. I do want to say that responsibility does also lie with the commission, I think. I don't want to downgrade that or say that it doesn't. So maybe we can integrate that somewhere else, maybe in relationships and communication. But, and then changing strategic initiative 3, which we will remove the numbering for, into more of an issues review and the role of the commission. And I think that gets to the lengthy discussion we had about campaign finance or campaign, I had it written out, ethical issues related to campaigning. That would probably fall under that issue review. And then looking at what came
So you're
out
saying
of,
that would be a task or under the issue review?
yes.
Okay.
Is that, Murray, is that thought process okay? And then moving education and outreach to the bottom, unfortunately. So deprioritizing education and outreach, and then we're left with relationships and communication, which is where we're at. So I think we have some good direction on changing kind of broad 10,000 foot things, but then we need to get more into the creating accountability within our processes and creating measurables.
One question about complaint, this is Alicia, with the spreadsheets that you have in the ancient Excel program, can you run with formulas for average for all of the pending complaints?
Yes, we can, but so there's different dates that we would go by. So depending on what date fields you want us to add, and we haven't historically logged all the different dates that are happening. We just keep one status date updated. So it'll take some work to go and pull all those dates and add them, but we can.
I was just wondering if that would be useful to say when you implement some of these changes, whether it reduces the average time, and maybe that's not data that's useful, just too much work to do.
I think we need to evaluate how much time it would take.
I'm just saying, you
But
don't want to do it if it doesn't yield anything useful.
But it might be a good baseline to demonstrate where we're at, right? And how long complaints are, because I think there's a lot of misconception that complaints are taking 2-3 years, when really that's 11 complaints, right? That are taking that long. Most of them are, I mean, if that, right? Most of them are taking far less. So that could create a good baseline. And then with the legislative changes, how is that complaint process faring now? So it would create data for us to have.
I think also with that spreadsheet, I don't think the format of it has changed since it was created whenever Holly created it. So as we
Alicia's
look at
added.
Alicia's added to it, but there's categories on it that I don't think we need when I look at it. So as we develop time management rules, et cetera, maybe revising that, whether that's in conjunction with the case management, RFP, however we do that, I'd like to revisit that just for my own purposes when I'm working on complaints.
I agree.
I have spreadsheets that I manage and they can just, the input can far exceed the data that you get on. So you have to be really careful about what you do.
Yeah.
There's information on it that you do not need in a spreadsheet. Like if you're looking for that, you should really just go look at the complaint itself or whatever document it references.
Yes. But we kept the format from when Holly first created that. I think you've added columns to it, but we haven't changed the ultimate format. So there might be ways to streamline that. As far as data collection is concerned, and this kind of gets back to our relationships strategic initiative, So one of the things that we had started doing was tracking when people reached out to us and estimating how much time we spent addressing an issue. What I ended up getting a concern about, and perhaps this was misplaced, was that, and then we would categorize it by the type of person calling. Was it a public citizen? Was it a legislator? Was it a public official? Was it, who was it? And we categorized it, but we also kept track of their names. And I had concerns about open records, that people wouldn't want to be calling and asking questions if we tracked who was calling. But I think that there would be a way, particularly now with the reduced resources for education, that if we tracked that, but didn't track the person who was calling or emailing and answering a question, but the subject matter, which we could create categories for, and then the subject, the person, which we could create categories for. So as far as data is concerned, I thought that would be helpful come 2027 session. And it could also then kind of fuel that relationship discussion about how we create relationships with the people who are reaching out for assistance. The other thing I want to share with the commission, I realize that Ron and Ward are gone, but one thing Logan and I don't currently do on a regular basis is track our hours and the projects that we are working on. I did do this for the month of January. Murray's laughing.
I don't want to do time slips ever again.
Right. I lived in the 0.1 increments of, right, you just don't want to do it.
It's useful.
But it is useful. And so we have contemplated it before, and Logan and I have discussed it, and we both ended up saying, this is going to take so much time for us to do. But what I did is in the month of January, all I did was kept track of the number of hours a day I worked for 1 month to see where I was at. And I can share that with you guys if you would like me to, but it was a lot. And I think that that information would again be helpful when we come to legislative session asking for FTEs, if we have a more detailed account of how we spend our time. Now, whether the commission wants us to break it down by project or by type of work, I certainly am not going to keep track of it in 0.1 increments like we did in private practice. I don't think Logan is interested in doing that.
That was part of the reason I took this job.
Yeah.
So
I'm just thinking of the questions you might get. So what would be the labels you'd want to have on there?
Yep.
So that someone won't know, well, what would you spend your time on?
Yep. So then I think there would be buckets for like operations work, operations work, complaint work, advisory opinion work.
Yep.
Rules creation.
Yes.
Adopting rules.
So categorize it, yes.
Categorize it. Not that we list a specific complaint and how long it took, right? So, but I think we need to do Logan and I haven't traditionally tracked our time. Because it's it's depressing to do. But I think that it would be good if we did that, because then we could have that data once we come back to the legislature and say, because what we're currently doing is not sustainable.
Right.
And so if we actually bring it back down to working only 40 to 45 hours a week, what would that look like?
part of our discussion too was, okay, let's say we don't keep track of the first 40, but those instances where we do need additional time put in, we'll keep track of whether it's 2, 5 hours over what we're doing in that additional time to make sure the commission's work is done when we can't get to it in the regular 40-hour work week.
That's true. That's another way that's probably the most efficient. Track the time outside of the 40 hours.
I still think we're going to end up getting questions. I mean, we just got peppered and
Yep.
a lot of questions on what are you doing? And I think, and we were frustrated by those questions because.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I think if we were to
Yeah,
leave it broad.
well, I think part of my frustration too is that, well, what are you doing with complaints? Well, I would love to tell you what we're doing with complaints, but the legislature made it a confidential process in the first place. So it's really hard to say, yes, we're doing all this work that you don't get to hear about because it's an executive session or otherwise, and these, whether they're complaints that are dismissed or not, a lot of time still gets put into those. So to say, well, you're not doing any work, I don't think that is an accurate or fair description of what we do on a daily basis. And I tried to articulate that when I had those questions asked, but I just think it's good for you as the commission to be aware of that. What our response is.
But you know, you saw that. They asked like, well, what are you doing? And legislature kept bringing up like, well, this is 2 years old. And the one legislator kept saying like, well, someone personally told them that it's been 2 years, 2+ years, whatever. And you can't speak about it, so.
There are good reasons which you can't explain.
Yeah, that's right.
But if you did time tracking, would you do it manually or for a small firm software?
I don't want to answer a question from over here, but I did want to pull up what I did in January so that you guys could see that. So OMB has we track Alicia's time, so I think that we could use it that way, but I don't think we could categorize it. I actually just had the thought that I should call Joe Goplin to see if Logan and I could start utilizing the same program you do, or the same timesheet, because we don't do that now. But is there a way that you can put on there what you worked on in that timesheet? Not really. Okay.
The other option is an Excel sheet.
And then the other option is the good old Excel sheet.
Which is free.
Which is free, we already have it, and, you know, what I created was just an Excel sheet. So I have to stay plugged in here, but
Plug in on the end like Alicia's.
yeah, I will. So how I did it is I kept it as simple as possible. And at the end of each day, I just went and entered how many hours I worked. So it's literally date, hours worked. And that's all I did. And then I totaled it up per week. So, but then what we could do is we could do date, hours worked, and then we could put our categories in there about what we worked on that day. But I think that would be helpful.
Certainly for the legislators,
Yes.
and for the reasonable ones. There's always be somebody, well.
So just as we have discussions, just so that the commission's aware, those are things that we've been thinking about internally. The reason we haven't done them is because they take resources and they take time, and we're already short on resources. So there are going to be things that are going to be pushed to the back, i.e. education and outreach. Anything else?
Do you have enough for the strategic plan? Are you going to rearrange what goes on your job description? Now, my note here is remove meaningful enforcement higher. Numbers are not relevant, but that's a higher priority.
Yep.
I mean, there's not a secret to how many we have. Not a secret. That's not a.
But also changing names or the words.
Changing the names, yep.
Language.
The language, yep, I have that, Cindy. I think the other, and this is kind of part of strategic initiative 2 now, is this, I'm going to call it the soft work that gets done, where you're having conversations and you may not, like I think of Murray, the individuals who we met with, right? Where you and I would go and speak to people about 2004, 2052, or Logan would, we kind of put Logan on a legislator to have those discussions. Not where there's necessarily a goal that you have to have done in a certain amount of time, but just that relationship and communication building. So I think that's going to be harder to quantify and to put in as specific, have metrics to see how we've met that. But we don't need to finalize this today.
I'm just thinking what's going to be the best information to show and the most credible information to show the legislators so we don't get second guessed. That's so, and I don't know what the answer is to that, but because I think some will second guess this no matter what.
Even if you did it for a couple of months at a time. I need to do that periodically just to show what I'm working on. It's useful.
It is useful information. So when I started doing just my time tracking in January, I stopped in February because it was just depressing. Because I'm going, I don't need to keep going. But yes, Maureen, I think it's a good idea.
Do bursts of tracking. And you could pick the particular months that are more important to track.
Yeah, I
That
think it
gives
would
the
be good
best
to account
example
for all
or
of our
best
time.
picture of what you do.
We could also report that out to the commission at meetings too.
So you've got enough sense from this and our discussion about what we're trying to do. From my perspective, it's like, I trust you. You just kind of tell me. I do want to know, just in general, this is how much time you spend on this. Just a sense. I think I have a sense of what that is.
I think you do, Cindy.
But I also don't, I'm leery or hesitant to really put it on paper and quantify it, because I'm scared it'll be used against us. But then we have to discern, and for me, it's prep for 2027. To go back in to fight for 2-3 FTEs about the workload. So this is what we're managing with what we have right now and what we're able to manage. But even in this context, this is not getting done. We can't do this, we can't do that.
So Cindy, I think there's going to be a point at which we're going to need some direction from the commission, because I think the question, and I think that this question's been asked already, but is our work being limited, or is your work being limited by the resources that are being made available?
Yes. I mean, look at the day and a half conversation, or more specifically, as we got to this topic about we're downplaying education and outreach, which to me, again, is a significant topic that we have talked about all along in the creation of the Ethics Commission. But now it's kind of getting put over here. It's good, it's important. We don't have staff, we don't have time. We got to focus on these other things, these more procedural things. Isn't that? Yeah. So from my perspective, when we get the minutes, let's make sure we're reviewing the minutes.
Well, I think it's important for the future that it becomes more, the information becomes more available to the public, what to spend your time on, and how much. And that's just going to be, because right now, that's your biggest question, is like, what do you do? It's frustrating, but it's like, you You can't fight that except
with data.
data. So yes, but, or you don't need to do every month, but you can do snapshots that I think will have the same effect. Right, I think so.
I'm not sure. I wonder if we try it and see, and then get.
Now, you know
an
better
update.
based on the questions you get or you received, what's gonna be more credible for those that you got the questions from.
Well, we probably won't get any questions now for,
No, but I mean, the
A little
questions you
while.
had,
yes.
what do you wish you would have had then when you got those questions? You know, so that's kind of how you go from here to what do you wish you had when you got those questions?
Some of those questions, I guess for me, even with tracking time, I think it's still hard to answer those questions because they were so you have all these complaints. Why
you
are
can't
these, what's the
talk about
work
it.
that's occurring here? So even with the data, I can say, well, I worked so many hours on a complaint, but then the follow-up is gonna be, well, why did it take so much time to do that? Why are you spending so much time on that? Well, then you can't answer that question because that's all going to be confidential. So I see that as a
It's a
issue
hurdle.
with even
Yeah.
keeping track of that data, because I still think that's going to be a question, even though that's a large part of what our jobs are.
How do we articulate that you can't explain any further? Because I mean, that's a problem. So
Now,
how do we articulate that appropriate or well enough so that I would understand, okay, I get it. You know, this is confidential. But I do get a picture of what you're doing. I don't know, I don't have an answer for that, but how do we do that?
well, that was my answer,
Yep,
that
that
I
was-
can't say anything.
Can't say
Which
anything at all.
they understand the confidentiality, but then that question would come back, and I'd be like, well, it's hard to answer it. You really have to see my previous answer that I can't answer. I understand the frustration, but I can't answer it.
I think you tried to answer that in the context of there were these issues that came up.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I give
Like,
very generic
generic
descriptions,
answers.
but then you can't get into the breakdown of here's how I'm spending my time with this specific complaint to address this issue. Which I'm sure they would like to hear that, but they know they can't hear it, and I know I can't provide that to them. So
Mhm.
it gets very difficult to have those frank conversations that we would like to have with that confidentiality.
Well, then that,
Unless it's a chat G.
Yeah.
Hypothetical.
Yes.
well, but this gets to my point of my frustration about, I've got my notes someplace and I didn't bring them with me, about watching the session and process and not being able to share. I'm like, I wanted to tell them that 40 cases, among those 40 cases, just more recently, 27 of them were about you. And then this thing about freedom of speech. So how do we as a commission, we know what we know, disclose that? But then that comes back to, for me, it's like, they need to be educated about what this is, but how they're using it. Because they're harming themselves. Their peers are complaining about each other. You can't be treating me this way or saying this about me. And a lot of the times it was, in fact, lies or whatever, and that. So, yeah. And again, we try to separate this stuff out.
Yep.
But ultimately, it still comes back to public information and sharing that. So, because we know what we're talking about. But they don't. I'm like, but I want them to know what we're talking about in the context of the complaints. So there has to be a way to disclose that. And that's part of why when I have the comment about doing an opinion piece about common sense ethics and whatever. Yeah. just, but I want them to know. At the same time, wait, we got this confidentiality thing and we can't.
And that's what people don't understand.
Yeah.
And they simply don't understand the confidentiality part. They know what the word means, but they don't know that they can't grasp how it applies in in your situation, what you're doing. Except when it just serves their need, when they talk about weaponizing.
Yeah,
Does
when
the
they weaponize the
confidentiality though, is it specific to naming people versus the subject matter or the topic?
So it's a fine line because if there's information that could
Yeah.
reveal what the complaint is about or who it's
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
then you have to err on the side of, no, that it is confidential. So like some of the things, putting them in categories, we're very careful about the categories that we come up with when we say this is the data for what these confidential complaints are. So I guess with the time management stuff, some of that might be articulating, well, what can we reveal with how these complaints are moved through the process? What data points can we create that don't reveal that confidential information? But that's a very hard question to answer.
Yeah.
And I cannot come up with that standing at the podium for a committee because I'm not going to reveal confidential information
Yep.
to answer what I think was an unfair question the third or fourth time it's asked.
It's because they don't understand that part of why that part has to be confidential. They don't understand that part of it. We know that every piece has to be, but legislators don't understand that part.
I think they understand that it is confidential. I think it's just the feeling that it's unfair that they don't get to know.
Oh.
But yes, you have to go back to it's confidential, so there's not much we can say. And you're going to have to be able to accept that answer, or maybe we need to look at the confidentiality piece as a whole if you want more specific data points.
Do we intend to continue working on that? I mean,
On
they killed
confidentiality.
Yeah, they killed our bill. Is there something we can do as a rule or something that can fix that problem?
So the respondent portion of it, where the respondent can speak, that was fixed in 2004. So to some extent, the weaponization issue there's a chip on that now, right? Where we've started chipping away at that. It certainly hasn't gotten to all of it, but certainly a portion of it, right?
And the terminology.
And the terminology, yes, which we had been pushing in 1360 and then ended up being in 2004, which is getting rid of the word accused individual. It just is accusatory by its definition, right? But yes, the confidentiality, I think that we have there could potentially be some work on confidentiality. I mean, we didn't put that in, the commission didn't put the confidentiality in
Right.
place. It was put in statute. So.
Maybe the answer needs to be, if you want more specific data points, then that needs to be a consideration in 2027.
Yeah.
Looking
Fix
at
this
the-
part of
They all-
5466.
Yep.
But you kind of tried that this session. This is the part that's a problem. You put the 1360 together, fix that problem, and it killed it. So it doesn't seem like explaining our situation helps that much.
We can keep trying. We will
Yeah.
keep trying.
We don't give up, but it's like, they didn't help us this much this time. So,
But I think for now, I think the staff has enough where we can at least come up with a new draft of the 25, 27.
Okay.
I think we're going to definitely have some things we'll have to work on during the June meeting to get there, but I have enough that I can start.
Okay, very good. Anything else for, I guess, anything else for further business or good of the order?
Records retention.
Yep, so records retention is just that
I thought it was just bringing the computer.
It
and
is.
Alicia fixes it.
It is, it's just that you guys still have a quorum, so, but I think Alicia's already done Cynthia's computer, she doesn't have to do Murray's computer, and so Dave, it's just your computer if you want to bring it in.
Okay.
Yep, and you could bring it in on your own.
Yep.
As well, but when we have everybody here, we have to put it on the agenda because it's a quorum.
Okay,
You can see our records retention policy we've attached as well.
You're gonna do Ron's remotely.
Yeah, or have him bring it in on the.
On the next meeting.
Next in-person meeting, yeah.
okay, anything else? All right, then this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.